Okay, so we've had a wonderful paper and two very exciting sets of comments. Biju has authorized an additional 5 minutes to this session. So we have a grand total of 15 minutes. So I think we'll take questions for 10 minutes and then give Ann and Susan 5 minutes to respond. And I'd ask that when you pose your question, you use the mic, and when you're done, you turn the mic off, right? Otherwise it creates interference. So. Because time is so compressed, I think we'd do better to gather some questions. But if you could keep your questions short, succinct, and sweet, that would be great.
This is short, succinct, and sweet, but pretty unanswerable, perhaps. For someone who's not at the World Bank, I had to ask, well, what are the goals of these CDDs? Is that what they're called? I could imagine that it would be to build skills, so that would provide in the long run a basis for challenging a corrupt state or a state that was a highly unequal state. I could imagine that you've got resources to distribute, and you want to have them distributed relatively justly and relatively practically. You don't want to do stupid things. So you ask people, how should we? And that's what it's about. Also, I can imagine you might want to change behavior. That's what the AIDS training sounds like. You know, it's called deliberation, but it's like the early studies in 1945, where Levin got the women, he tried to figure out what would get them to feed their kids cod liver oil. And because they were taking the orange juice for the troops, and so you had to get, and they found that the thing that got the greatest results in practice was making a decision in a small group and committing to it in a small group. So that's been like known for a zillion years, since 45 anyway. Maybe that's the goal. But until I know what the goal is, and I presume there's lots of goals, it seems harder for me to see, is deliberation doing what it should be doing? Is it worth spending? The challenge was thrown out, $2 billion for it. Well, what are you spending the $2 billion for? What are the goals? And so that's a very big question. But I wanted to, sorry to just quickly, if I look at my list of high and low quality deliberation, the lady's talking about the husband who might or might not have AIDS and so forth, seems to me very high on all of those criteria. Accountability is not particularly relevant. Publicity is not particularly relevant. Giving reasons, they're giving reasons, a lot of good reasons. It's an equal situation. There's a fair amount of respect. There's no particular power operating on the thing. Now, how much of the epistemic value did it have is another question. In other words, and also when I look at the politics of it, going back to the comment that was just made, it's an unequal playing field. I didn't see anybody drawing the larger conclusions about what we should do as women about this, because there's no social movement out there to kind of connect to. And there's no suggestion, for example, that the husband be tested for AIDS, because that would be really, I imagine, something that they're too powerless to do. So the context of external powerlessness is pretty high here. And so I'm wondering about my criteria. This thing comes really high on all those criteria for the sort of quality of the deliberation. And yet, although it was neat to read and grade, and I thought, yes, these are definitely people talking together, I was pretty frustrated at the outcomes. If I was the World Bank, I wouldn't necessarily have wanted to spend a piece of my $2 billion bringing those ladies together, unless I thought it was going to build skills in the long run, bring these women together here in the long run. So that was my question. What's it for?
Arjun?
Yes. I'm not going to take up time on a lot of the rich detail in your paper, which is indeed fascinating, and I think the two commentators picked up on a lot of it, so I won't do that. But I think the question it opens up for me, as somebody very sympathetic to this kind of information, which is close to the flow of social life, is a kind of methodological question or something like that, which goes back to also my paper, to the comments, Jane Mansbridge's comments and others, which is connected really in a way to her comment now, and that is, how shall we have some kind of prudential principle for using the difference and the distance and the tension between, let's just say, the wide range of conversations in that constitute the everyday and actually construct the everyday, and those not necessarily official, but some more pointed, more pragmatically focused, decision-oriented settings, which say the bus thing is precisely not. And I can think of many things in India which are very similar, very important, and also very volatile, but somehow not in the category of outcome-oriented things. So without being either mechanical or draconian and saying we'll count the following kinds of everyday things but not the others, etc., in some mechanical, predefined way, I'm thinking over these couple of days that we are here together, it might be very good to develop some criteria for what I was struggling to do with the idea of performative change, etc., but there may be other ways to do it, about some criterion which will allow us to say that there are some kinds of things out of the archive of everyday life, which we're lucky to have in this case so richly, and some more narrow set of outcome-oriented discussions, because otherwise I think you and I have a challenge in what's relevant, even if we had perfect access to a huge range of cases of unmediated social exchange. There's a kind of strategic problem, shall we say, that yeah.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. Gianpaolo?
Just I'll make a very quick comment to Patrick and Biju. I thought the comments on this paper were terrific, and I would urge you to include them in the book or whatever comes out of this in some way as part of kind of para-ethnography, in a sense, a practitioner point of view about what practitioners or what people are trying to do on the ground and what their motivations and how they understand these kinds of interactions is. I found it super enlightening. I mean, I'm not of the World Bank, but I just thought it was a just really rich window with a lot of provocative things we can talk about.
Sorry, yeah, I had a couple of comments for Burke. One is, when we left the motel we stayed in 2004, they also threw us a big party and said how much they loved us and how grateful they were to us because we'd been really good for their business. So actually in Malawi it is common to try to give something back to people who've given something to you. That's the understanding of reciprocity. So that wasn't an unusual, that was actually quite a traditional event you witnessed. And the other comment, I take great exception to the notion that the woman should have conceived of herself as a person with rights. And I think that importing your belief about what makes you a person into settings you know nothing about is a huge error. So we would have to have that discussion at length, but I think that anybody who heard that as just a natural way to think about this situation should think again. It's not natural. And the third very quick comment is that one of the problems here is that to whatever degree resource important decisions really are being made and people do get some access to justice of some sort, it depends enormously on the sense of obligation of the people who redistribute and the people who maintain peace, to maintain peace and harmony in their communities. You undermine those things and you have undermined all the local reasons why people get access to resources who might not otherwise. So that doesn't mean you couldn't substitute a totally different system in another lifetime. You might.
All right, the trainings as participatory, I agree that they don't need to be participatory, they can be top-down, but the donors, the NGOs want them to be participatory. And that was our exact point, that they were foiled. in doing it. They could not impose that participatory structure on it. In the court case of personal injustices, and in the church talk, there are personal injustices that they're talking about, but it's also a resource distribution issue. That the resources, if the guy goes to a girlfriend, resources meant for the wife and the family are going to a girlfriend. So it's a micro resource distribution issue. And it's something that's very close to a lot of people's heart. There's one context that we didn't think about before we wrote this paper, and that is arguments about fertilizer coupons. It's one of the two resources that the government distributes, are subsidized fertilizer coupons and work for food or work for minimum wage through the World Bank's Social Action Fund. And that generates a huge amount of griping and grumbling. And to me, that would be one of the easier topics to slide in to something that was more generalized. Burke's Matrix. Who deliberated? We don't know that. And do you have transcripts of it? How do you know they deliberated well? Exactly. The journalist in Inner Circle is a very good point. And it just happens that this particular woman is, because she has a secondary school education and she's very nice, she's on a lot of committees. But I'm perfectly willing to accept your caution about that. Property grabbing, and this is Anne's point too, she did assert her rights, I think. But she didn't do it in international human rights language. And I think you can't look for it only in that language. We also don't know we don't know the background of that marriage. The goals of the CDDs, Jenny's question, is not my question to answer. Okay, I think that's all I have sensible to say.
Perfect timing.
All right, good. If sensible.
There's